Hi, my name is Mary Lou Haryu, and I am the Executive Director of the United Way of Beaver County. And I am at Shell Polymers Monaca today with Matthew Arceneaux, who is a Shell employee. So Matthew, you're here today to tell your story.
So I know we started talking after the United Way campaign kickoff breakfast, and I know one of the areas of focus for your campaign this year is ALICE households and families. What are those? What does ALICE stand for those who might not know?
Well, ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained Employed. And in Beaver County, 39% of the households are ALICE or below. 11% is in poverty, 28% is ALICE. They are all under the ALICE threshold, which means that they can't afford the essentials. So when you think about more than a third of our community is struggling, it's just, we can't let that continue. And so that's why the United Way of Beaver County has tried to step in. We've developed the ALICE Fund, which Shell Polymers Monaca has been so instrumental in helping us develop that fund. They've given matching grants, which inspired our community and our corporations to give to the ALICE Fund. And with that money, we've been able to put out into the community already in 1 year, $120,000 to agencies that are helping with utility assistance, workforce development, food insecurity, youth mentoring, and educational opportunities. But that's not enough, and we need to do more. And so that's why we continue talking about ALICE, talking about their needs, and that's why your story that you're going to talk about is so important. So Matthew, I know that your story is very tied and very relevant to the United Way and to ALICE. Would you be willing to share your story with us?
It'd be my pleasure. Seeing the programs that the United Way takes part in, especially the ALICE programs, struck a chord. You see, for most of my childhood, I remember the fire that took our house when I was 5. Mostly, I remember the sound of the flames. That fire was shortly followed by the divorce of my parents, leaving us, a family of 5, a single-parent household. I remember us moving to a new house, a rental, recommended by someone from church, as a cheap place to live and a landlord who was gracious and patient with struggling families. It was easy to move as we had lost quite a bit in the fire. In fact, I remember furniture, clothing, toys being donated by the United Way, the Salvation Army, and other programs affiliated with them. The same friends from church put my mom in contact with the family that ran the local Youth Service Bureau in our town. It's a local program that was partnered with United Way and focused on kids in rough circumstances with a goal of reducing truancy and helping kids to meet their immediate needs so that they could still invest in their futures and pursue education. That family became a lifeline over the years and became our adopted set of parents, with whom we still keep in touch today. Sadly, we became all too familiar with the programs the United Way offers. There were many times I watched my mom struggle to decide which utility was going to be turned off because we could only afford a subset. In the winters, we could get by for a few weeks without the gas, as the winters weren't too cold where I grew up. In the summer, cold showers helped, because Louisiana summers got hot, and so gas was usually the first one to go. There was only one time I remember water being the utility that was turned off. 2, I remember the worker who came to turn it off talked with Mom for a while, as she asked for some grace, some more time to pay the bills. He still turned it off because he had a job to do. But I remember him handing Mom the wrench so that after he left, we could turn it back on. And he told her he'd waive the reconnect fee if it happened to be on when he came back, and just put it down as a typo in the paperwork. We made many calls to programs like the United Way's 211. There were many months we were in fact able to keep basic utilities on because of the grace and charity of those who supported our local programs. Our nearest neighbors were cow fields that surrounded our house and were, to a quartet of bored children, a vast wilderness of blackberries, honeysuckles, pecan trees, pears. We heartily supplemented our snacks and meals with whatever nature had around. The cows learned to tolerate us as we explored and foraged. Just beyond the cow fields, about a half-mile up the road, was a reserve base. Usually it sat quiet and empty for 3 weeks out of the month. But one weekend each month was Commodities Day. We would trudge up the road on foot, because we didn't have a car for most of my youth, and line up with dozens of other families, excited at the prospects of large blocks of government cheese, 10-pound bags of rice, and beans. Boxes of powdered milk we learned to stretch by diluting a bit further than the instructions said. The white bread that somehow never went bad, yet never tasted of anything but sweet cardboard, but still made the best toasted cheese sandwiches. I remember the relief that passed my mom's face when we learned we were finally approved for food stamps and commodities, and we got to make the trek down to the reserve base. For my mom, it was an extension of grace, a much-needed lifeline. For the most part, the families that were there were quite like us, on the edge but making it through the mercy and the grace of the community. Some of those who processed, of course, dropped comments about employment, bad decisions, bootstraps. The usual feedback that came with such help. But we couldn't afford to be bothered by it. 5 hungry bellies drown out a certain level of criticism. Even later, when we graduated from poverty to Alice, things got complicated. We were incredibly blessed to be chosen to receive a Habitat for Humanity house. To the day she passed, my mom treasured the letter we got that announced we had been chosen. Back then, President Carter still signed some of the letters by hand, and it was one of my mom's happiest mementos. We put in the hard work. To receive a Habitat house, the family has to put in hours helping clear the land, build the home, and personally invest, whether by painting, hanging insulation, putting up drywall. Insulation was not my favorite. Far from a handout, it was a home, and it was an investment for the whole family. We were sad to leave the blackberries and the honeysuckle and the cow patties behind, but we still had the comforting sound of the trains rolling through in the early morning. Around the time that we moved, my mom went back to school. It was a very big deal for us. She was put in touch with a program that later partnered with the United Way to help non-traditional students work on their degrees, often sponsoring babysitting events or after-school events so parents could work on homework or attend late-in-the-day classes. In fact, my mother took part in expanding the program, engaging with donors and churches to make it more accessible. I remember staying home sick from school one day and I wound up going to calculus class with her because she didn't want to leave me home alone but couldn't miss the class. And I sat there amazed at the logic and beauty of the math. I'm a nerd, I know. And watching my mom concentrate on taking notes and asking questions. It took her a while to graduate, limited in class because of the 4 of us. But we had homework time in the evenings, all of us sitting together. On weekends, we would continue volunteering with the Habitat for Humanity, while Mom would run and take a test that a professor would let her take on a day off because of her schedule. She graduated summa cum laude, and I remember the cheers as she walked across the stage. Not just from us, but we were pretty loud, but from her entire class. That victory happened because of the grace and care and charity of groups like the United Way. There was never a Christmas that we didn't have something under the tree, because of Tangy Cares, which partnered with the Salvation Army for underprivileged kids. On Thanksgiving, we always had a turkey and some fixins because of the local food pantry. Even on New Year's, we would have a pot of black-eyed peas, some cabbage, and a chunk of pork tossed in for traditional Southern dinner to kick off the new year, and it was a gift from those who believe it takes a community to raise a child. We did go hungry at times, but we never starved. We took full advantage of free lunches at school, and it probably made the difference. It's impossible to focus on lessons with a hurting stomach. And for the most part, we did pretty well in school. I was older before I realized, though, that grace is not always gracious. That handouts, which meant a meal to my family, meant lazy or poor judgment to others. Admonitions to work hard fell on hungry ears, and I learned to hear the comments that often weren't vocalized. Every time I saw the effects on my mother, a single woman with 4 kids, struggling to provide for us in a world that shared mixed signals that we were the future, but we were also broken from our past. I learned to recognize that flinch she tried to hide when it came to collect commodities or cash in food stamps. She was injured at work one day. A computer fell off of a table, back in the day when that meant a huge piece of equipment. And it was where all of the maps and the data that her company used was stored, because we weren't very good at creating backups yet. She caught it, saving the company countless hours of work and a small fortune in equipment. It cost my mom her back. They cut a small check, and after having so recently graduated from poverty to an Alice household, we were back on the border between the two. Now we had a disability check to try and bridge the gap between them. Medical care was provided and we used it. Sadly, all too often. A proud, intelligent woman was back in the realm of prioritizing which necessity was more necessary. It crushed her, and this time the comments were louder. When, after years of judgment, the glances, the comments found her in a bad way after a rough month, she made a decision that, at the time, she thought was the right one. She thought her circumstances were her failures, her fault, and that we, her kids, would be better off with our other parents, whom she had taken to court several times just to get the bare minimum in support. She was convinced that the put-downs were right, and that she was at fault, and she tried to remove herself from the equation. We were lucky. Through the Red Cross, I had gotten CPR training and first aid training. I was the one who found her. I knew who to call, and I knew what to do. I knew, too, why she tried. She survived in no small part because of the resources, the investment into our community that our local agencies provided. She spent a few weeks away from us, the first time she'd been separated from us for even a full week in years. But she got the medical help she needed. We discovered that she suffered from depression. No duh, I remember thinking. But they taught her how to recognize warning signs. They taught us the same. It was a United Way program that put her in contact with a support group, because apparently a lot of single mothers on the edge of poverty and hunger fought similar struggles. Mental health is an incredible need, and it's often one of the hardest to truly get help for, and yet we were blessed enough to find the help we needed at that time. All of this I say, not for sympathy, for empathy, or pity. I've received far more of all of those than I could have ever deserved. I share these events because at every turn, no matter how bad things got, there was help. Life-saving, future-redeeming, restoring faith in humanity help. Often in the form of the United Way. We grew up. We didn't just survive. We thrived. Of the four of us, two have advanced degrees. All four of us gainfully employed. We haven't gone hungry in years, something my doctor probably wishes I were a little more familiar with. My family and I can handle an emergency if one pops up. We give back because we know an investment in the community around us is to better the community around us. I wasn't blessed enough to grow up in western Pennsylvania. You'd have to follow the Ohio River all the way down to the Mississippi, and then follow that all the way down to find folks whose last name looked like mine. But I was pleasantly surprised to find some Molyneux and Michauds up here, even if they aren't Bujots and Thibodeaux. But Pennsylvania is now my home. It's one I'm happy to give to invest in, to sow seeds of the grace I've been so fortunate to reap. Hard work and stubbornness are only two planks of the bridge needed to cross the chasm from where we are to where we need to be. Sometimes, when we're on the edge, reaching across to our dreams, our hopes of simple things, a full belly, comfort in the face of a cold spell, or a sudden bill. Sometimes, when we have dragged ourselves as far as we can, spent every cent of sweat and desperation, all that can help bring us safely across that gap is the grace of an outstretched hand. A neighbor dropping off some extra groceries because there was something on sale. A church member writing a small check because the cold spell meant costs went up and they knew we'd be struggling. A friend recommending us for Habitat because they saw in us the potential that we often struggled to see in ourselves. The United Way stepping in to help carry us when we were too exhausted just from surviving to take that step. There were countless times in my life, personally, that I can attest to the power of community, to the recognition of that commitment to the humans around us, to knowing that sometimes circumstances overwhelm hard work and good judgment and leave one stranded, rarely alone, but feeling isolated. It is into that gap that I see the United Way and ALICE programs step in time and time again. Now I don't get to decide where Shell donates its money. That's above my pay grade, and it's a decision I happily leave to Steve and the other members of our leadership team. But I'm fortunate enough to take part in some of our employee groups who help to give back to the community. I'm happy to repay a small part of the kindness, the charity, the grace, and the faith of those who gave so much to me along the way. I'm more fortunate than many because I can testify personally to the effectiveness of programs like those supported by the United Way. I can lend my voice to the call to see those around us in need as not charity cases or lapses in judgments, but humans in need. So often, humans caught up in circumstances which are beyond their control and in need of a hand, a shoulder, some patience. I'm happy to give back because what I have is because somebody else gave and saw what could be. Here, by the grace of the many, thank you.